Okay, it's 6:03. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming again. I guess we keep on doing this. It's very hard to believe. Every week it becomes harder to believe that it's another week has gone by. So many weeks of so much positive expectation, only to be disappointed once again. And that seems to be the story what's been going on. Expectations of a deal, and then no deal. Uh, we are now 2 weeks after uh, Prime Minister Netanyahu's trip to the States. The only thing accomplished by his trip, it would seem, would be putting off his trial dates for 2 more days. Get to that in a minute, since he's managed to put it off again this week because now he's sick. And by the week after, the court goes into vacation for a month. So he's been doing very good at putting off his case consistently. But we'll leave that part aside. The expectations here in Israel were that when he came back, or from Washington, it would be announced as an agreement for the hostages. That clearly has not happened. Um, and, every day, optimistic signs. And then about an hour or two ago, a report, Israeli sources believe that by the end of the week, some sort of agreement can be reached. Then Barak Ravid, reporting from Washington uh, an hour ago, said, don't believe that. It's just another spin. Now, if it's another spin or not, I don't know. I think, and I say this very, very cautiously because that's all I can be is cautious, is that Netanyahu has come to the conclusion that the Gaza war has to end in Israel's interest, is at this point so obvious that the cost is so much higher than whatever gains we possibly can by killing another group of Hamas fighters, by destroying another tunnel, whatever is going on. I'm not even talking about the cost in lives of our soldiers, which are very real, but just the cost in the army, which is beyond exhausted, the cost to the lack of support at this point. The big change in Israel in the last 2 weeks has been there have now been groups of parents of regular soldiers. Regular soldiers in Israel are those that are drafted at 18 and part of the regular armies. They're not reservists that are called back. These are soldiers that are volunteered to be in Golani and you name it, all the different groups that are down in Gaza, and their parents are organizing and complaining and saying it's enough, it's time to bring them home. They haven't been, they've had like 2 days off in 2 years, exaggerating a little bit, but not by a lot. This is not the way the Israeli army has ever been set up. And these are not the way these kids have been, grew up to be quite honest with you. We can talk about the long-term damage to this generation at some other point, but it's going to be significant, keeping in mind that this is the same generation that went through COVID during high school. So I don't want to even begin to think of the psychological care that's going to be needed for this whole generation once this is all over. But let's put it this way, the fact that the parents of the regular soldiers will begin to organize is a very real pressure point. In addition, of course, the reservists have organized as well at this point. There was a center point around the issue of the draft of the ultra-Orthodox, that nothing is really going to change in the near future relating that, it looks like. But in the meantime, the ultra-Orthodox politicians have left the government theoretically. We'll talk about that later as well. But that's an additional pressure point to bring the war to an end. Then, of course, there's the fact that President Trump wants it to end. He's made it clear at this point that he thinks the war should come to an end. And finally, there is some realization, it seems pretty minor, but some realization that how every single day this war goes on in Gaza, our international situation gets worse. And it doesn't make a difference how much explaining we do and this and that. It doesn't really matter. The fact of the matter is the images from Gaza go from bad to worse. The lack of a future plan, the lack of any vision, the lack of any thought makes it so much worse. And so the understanding is that this just has to end. And at this point, between those who want to end, period, right away, or those who want a partial deal followed by a full deal, we were at 83% of the Israeli public at that point believes that. That's an incredibly high percentage. And Netanyahu sees that. Um, will it be enough? I don't know. Um, is he willing to take the risk of losing his government from Ben-Gvir and Smotrich while he already lost the ultra-Orthodox? I think he will be willing to because I think he's willing to go to elections, although he knows he's going to. Somehow thinks he'll pull out a rabbit and win the next election. Maybe if he brings back the hostages, it might help him, but the Iran war didn't help him. So it's not at all clear that anything will help him. I think in his mind, he believes that the Iran war wiped out the disaster of October 7th. It didn't wipe out October 7th to Israelis. And of course, that's part of the problem is we keep on living on October 7th, but that's a different question. Uh, so all in all, I think he realizes we have to bring this war to an end. Israelis all realize we have to bring this war to an end to a large extent. No one understands what the gain is coming from another day of fighting, another week of fighting, destroying another Hamas tunnel and another Hamas tunnel. This could go on for years, and we won't have an army left if it goes on for years. And we won't have a friend left in the world if it goes on for years, because as we're seeing, the left in America has long been lost. We're now seeing more and more the far right also. So not good signs overall. And I think I, I think the Israeli government, the Israeli people realize it. I mean, I don't know about the government. The people all realize it. The government still is run by people who somehow think there's a military solution to everything. And we'll get into that in a minute. We're really good at military solutions, certainly if they come from the air. Beyond that, I don't know. In the meantime, we keep on losing soldiers, thankfully a small number, but a constant number. And every soldier we lose, as they say, is a world unto himself. We're also losing soldiers to suicides. There were 3 suicides. Well, now it's 4 because one of the ones, the person who tried to commit suicide 3 days ago, he died this morning. So there are 4 successful suicides in less than 2 weeks in the army. That's almost double the normal rate of suicides, or more than double. Um, it's just too much. It's too much for everybody along the way. And we do not have the number of psychologists to deal with it. Um, if you're a psychologist and want to move to Israel, it's a great time. There's an incredible shortage of psychologists, especially when you have a whole country that needs psychological help at this point. So that's where we stand in Gaza. We don't stand anywhere as different than we stood last week or the week before or the week before that. Maybe we're closer to an agreement only because at some point there'll be an agreement. So I guess we're closer than we were a week or two ago. But are we really? We don't know. And look, Hamas has always wanted one thing: end the war. We'll give you back all the hostages, and you pull out completely, and we get certain guarantees. Of course, the guarantees won't be worth much, but we'll take the guarantees and say we won the war. Um, There was a real problem a year ago before we destroyed Hezbollah, before we did what we did in Iran and everything else. Today, it's something we easily can afford to do, but it's not clear this government is ready to do it in one step. So I don't know what to say. It's very frustrating. Some days I'm hopeful, some days I'm not. Depends on so many different matters. But the war continues. And by the way, the Houthis continue as well. We'd not woken up. It was before we'd gone to sleep, but Friday night, I don't know, around 10 something, the Houthis came to visit again, sent everybody from Jerusalem and Tel Aviv into the bomb shelters again. One missile was intercepted. The odds of a missile getting through are not all that great, but we keep in mind that I know of 3 cases where they did get through. There's the one at Ben Gurion Airport that caused so much damage, not physical, but damage to our ability for our airlines fly here. There was one in Yaffo, and there was one in Ramat Gan a few months ago that did get through. So, as someone who lives 2 blocks or less than 2 blocks away from a building that was seriously hurt, seriously injured, not injured, but damaged by the Iranians, we take every missile alert seriously and head to the shelter below our house. So that keeps that going. So that's Gaza. Let's switch to Syria, which um, I'll try to make some sense of something that even I don't even I, a lot of people don't fully understand. Um, and I don't think anyone fully understands that. I just finished doing a podcast which I'll release probably tomorrow with my friend Ehud Chaik, who who knows the Druze well. He worked with them heavily in the army, and so we discussed it and tried to get a better understanding. So we're in this strange situation where we have no really good answers. First of all, we don't know how much the Druze are being uh, massacred, attacked, everything else like that. We see a lot of the videos, we see a lot of the information. We have to assume it's real, but in this day of AI and everything, you can never be 100% sure that everything we see is correct. But there's no question that they're being attacked. We cannot allow the Druze in Syria um, to be victims of a genocide there. We allowed a genocide to take place in Syria during the Syrian civil war. For any of you who were reading me back 6 or 8 years ago, I thought then that we should have intervened in the Syrian civil war, but that was a different situation. This is a more specific situation because the degree that the Druze care for one another and for the degree that the Druze are part of this country and part of the army. Now, one can make an argument that if we cared so much about the Druze, we wouldn't have passed this, what's called Chok La'om, which is a nationality law that basically said that Jews have some sort of a first right of something or other in this country above anybody else. Terrible, terrible law. You can imagine which government passed it, but we'll leave that part aside. They promised to include the Druze. They've never done anything about doing that. But let's leave that part aside. The fact of the matter is the Druze, um, as much as Jews care for Druze wherever they are, um, there are the largest number of Druze are located in Syria. It's their religious home, so to speak. The Druze mountain, which is a sacred place for them, is located in Syria. So we can't allow them to be massacred. The Druze are a long ago offshoot of Islam. I had this argument with some people. They are an offshoot of Islam from a long time ago. So to many radical Islamists, they are heretics. And I don't have to tell you what you do to heretics. It's worse than Jews who never believed, but they're worse in a certain sense. So it's very problematic. Um, look, 2 weeks ago, we were hoping that we would be on the road to peace with Syria. That was the general hope in Israel. That was the belief that the Syrians had an interest in reaching peace with us. We could reach peace, and Giuliani or Abu Ashara, it was true, and it was no longer an Islamist, and he had reformed. There were those who warned against that. I don't know. I don't know. No one really knows. Is all of this a result of a situation that was beyond his control, or all of this a result of something that was planned, or is this somewhere in between? We don't know. I'm hoping that somewhere in the depths of the Israeli intelligence services they do know, um, but it's a real problem, and it's a real problem because we see things a little bit different than the Americans do. I'm about to go on I-24 and discuss the American position relating to uh, the situation in Syria. And it's not an easy situation because there's two parts to that. One is the American dream is always about redemption, right? Everyone believes you can be redeemed. So the fact that he said he was no longer an Islamist, that's great. We can redemption. Redemption comes easily in American perspective sometimes. So he's seen as redeemed. There's also, and there is continues to be, this goes all the way back. It's on the left and on the right. I actually came across an article. I was doing research the other day, and I think I'm going to link to it tonight if I remember. Um, and came out in 2011 or 2012, and it talked about how the left in the world had blinders relating to radical Islam. That radical Islam was okay, and therefore not something you should worry about. And nothing's changed. I remember I just saw a post on what was considered Islamophobia in England by the British Labour Party in some recent decision. Islamophobia was includes asking about the status of women in the Islamic world, all sorts of questions that are just questioning anything that goes on in the Islamic world is considered Islamophobia. So to Americans, oh, it's always a religious guy, big deal. America believes in religious people. And so there's no sense of understanding what radical Islam is, despite the fact that America went through 9/11. 9/11 is ancient history at this point. We forget that. Ancient history. Something that took place 24 years ago, almost in a month and a half. To most Americans, that really is far off history. The intelligence people who came on board after 9/11, they're mostly all retired at this point. Uh, there's been a change in time, and maybe Islam isn't all that bad, and maybe we can make life, agreements with them and peace with them and everything else like that. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying we can't. We have to worry about it. And I think the Americans sometimes are easy to be naive. Now, are they being naive about Giuliani? I don't know. I thought Israel was being too cautious, and I may have been proven wrong. Maybe, Israel's caution was justified as what we've seen. We don't know. And that's part of the problem. And when I say we, I mean the public. I mean the people who are tied in and understand what's going on as best as we can. But we're not intelligence operatives. And we don't have some of the inside information that I'm hoping and praying that our intelligence services have to make the right decisions. The problem is, what do we do? We made it clear that we were going to defend him. We made it clear we bombed, threw some bombs in Damascus. Was that a good idea? Again, as from a Western perspective, that sounds like it's an overreaction. From a Middle East perspective, maybe it's not. I don't know. Um, I don't really know. That's the honest truth. But the problem is we do not want to get involved on the ground there. The Jews' village of Soreida is 100 kilometers from our border. Can we operate at that distance? Of course we can. Do we want to? Do we have the army that's been tied down in Gaza for the last year and a half to do that? Again, we have it, but at what cost? At what capability? At what cost to people? We're going to bring back whoever's not in reserve right now. We just can't keep doing this. The problem is every solution doesn't have a kinetic solution. And since we don't have a diplomatic corps worth speaking about, and we don't have a foreign minister who has any value, and I don't think we have anyone in the government who one would possibly describe as an Arabist, who understands the Arab world in depth, what can we expect? So the only solution we have is send in the army, or in most cases, send in the Air Force, because the Air Force is the most capable part of the Israeli army. So that's what we did. We sent in the Air Force. We bombed some positions of the Syrian army. We bombed some positions of some of the Bedouins. We bombed in Damascus a couple of places that just to show that we could do it, which no one needed to show. It was quite obvious that we can do it since they have no air defenses. But what have we accomplished? I don't know. I don't know. And it's not something that the Sunni Arab states who really want to make a deal with the new Sunni Syrian state want to see. And on top of everything else, the Syrian government sees their major enemy being Iran and the Shiites, which is our major enemy. So we should be able to do better. We should be able to do better. We should be able to do better with diplomacy, but we haven't, and that's a real problem. A bunch of other points. West Bank, first of all. Um, Ambassador Huckabee, U.S. ambassador to Israel, who is probably one of the most outspokenly pro-Israel, right-wing pro-Israel ambassadors have ever come. I guess David Friedman wasn't that much less, but Huckabee is even more outspoken. Interfered twice this week, once appropriately and once totally inappropriately. Appropriately, when he called out the fact that an American citizen was killed in the West Bank, Judea, and Samaria by settlers and demanded that the terrorists who did that be brought to trial. Let's be honest, none of the settlers who've been rampaging in the West Bank over the last 2 years, to lesser or to greater extent, sometimes killing people, sometimes just damaging property, almost none of them have been brought to trial. Why? Because we have a police minister who's basically spent his youth with them. We have a minister of defense in the Ministry of Defense, plus the finance minister, the same guy, who also spent his whole youth with them, who supports them. And every once in a while will say, oh no, never resort to violence. Wink, wink. And that's the reality. And it's embarrassing and it's terrible. And there's almost nothing we can do about it, at least not with the current government. I'm not even sure what a better government would do, but that's a different set of problems. At least they might try to do something. So it's an ongoing problem, and I don't have any good solutions, to be very honest with you. The other side of the intervention was when he intervened in the court case of Prime Minister Netanyahu. Like I said, the case gets delayed and delayed and delayed. Netanyahu requested a delay because of after the war, after the Iranian war. He said he had very important things to do for the future of the country. The court turned him down. Then he rolled out the defense minister, not defense, yeah, well, the defense minister was there too, but the chief of intelligence, the chief of the Mossad, and they all said how important things were. Of course, it was all BS. Netanyahu spent the week in campaign stops, basically. And then came his trip to Washington, so he couldn't, he has to go to Washington. That's much more important than being on trial for bribery. And then, well, he was out for one day, and then what happened? Well, now he's sick. So it's being pushed off as much as he can. Like I said, next week begins the vacation of the courts. Another absurdity in this country. The courts go on vacation for a whole week. Now, Ambassador Huckabee attended one of the sessions for 5 minutes. He was given the teddy bear by Bugs Bunny, excuse me, Bugs Bunny teddy bears, given to Bugs Bunny by Netanyahu, believe it or not, and then carried it and said, "This is all about Bugs Bunny." Now, keep in mind the whole issue of Bugs Bunny was he's not being on trial for Bugs Bunny. It just came up in one of the testimonies of how Arnold Milchan, one of the people who theoretically bribed him, went crazy finding the right teddy bear, right Bugs Bunny, excuse me, for Netanyahu's youngest son when the youngest son was younger. So now it's all about Bugs Bunny. That's the newest cry of the Likud. He went to the courthouse. He spent about 5 minutes listening to the court session in Hebrew, which he doesn't understand. And then he came out and said, Trump is right. This is all one big witch hunt, basically. Once again, this is something that's never done. There is never, the idea of interfering in a legal case in Israel is beyond the pale in any sort of normal diplomatic relations, but that doesn't stop the Trump administration and Trump from doing it. Now, the latest counter just took place in the last 24 hours. The Republicans released some report that shows money that they then theoretically went from Biden to fight Netanyahu. Well, not exactly. What actually took place was the Biden administration supported an organization, an NGO organization that basically funnels money to 1,000 NGOs, literally thousands of NGOs. In other words, a lot of contracts went via that organization. That organization, one of the organizations that it supported, was an Israel-based organization that also supports all sorts of thousands of, I don't know, thousands, maybe hundreds of different causes in Israel. And one of those causes ended up being some of the people who were fighting judicial reform. we're talking when everything's said and done, maybe 100,000 shekels that went from this third level group to the through the to the mecha, to the people who fought judicial reform. There is no proof or anything at all that one thing was related to the other. The fact that the American government gave money to this big NGO that sent money to Africa and to Asia and to all sorts of places has nothing to do with the fact that it also gave money for this. It had other funding sources besides the US government, and the same with the Israeli organization. But immediately, the Israeli right and the Likud came out and said, see, Netanyahu, excuse me, Biden was trying to take down Netanyahu. Biden came out against Netanyahu. As someone who worked with the American embassy prior to the election of President Trump in 2016, I can say, and I worked on election type knowledge, and I worked on a project to tell Israelis about the Israeli election, the American election system. The American embassy is very, very careful not to get involved in any which way in partisan politics in Israel in any which way. Everything has to be reviewed, had to be reviewed. It's just not true. But let's make things equal. Let's just say that what Trump does is normal, the new normal, etc., etc. Politics. So the draft law that was put together at the by well, we'll go back. The ultra-Orthodox have been demanding a new draft law based on the way the law currently stands. All of the kids between the ages of 18 and 26, men, are liable to be drafted. They've been demanding a new law that would exempt them from that. They pressed the head of the Committee of Foreign Affairs and Defense for an agreed upon law. The night before the Iran strike, they talked about a general agreement for a law. Uh, Obviously, he was in on the secret, and they didn't want the government to come down the night before the Iran attack. Now that it was over, they started filling in some of the blanks. They didn't like the blanks, and they did not approve of the final agreement that Yuli Edelstein came up with. As a result, the two, or should the main Ashkenazi ultra-Orthodox party pulled out of the government, and that followed by the Shas party, which mostly pulled out of the government. When I say mostly, they came out of the government, but theoretically they didn't leave the coalition. It's not at all clear whether the coalition is a minority government or a majority, or still not. But at this point, Netanyahu has either 51 or 40 seats out of the 60. So, excuse me, 61 or 50 seats out of the 60, or 49, actually, I'm sorry. So the reality is he does not really have a majority, but they can't bring down the government in any case because next week the Knesset also goes onto vacation. We're the only country that in the middle of a war, the courts and the parliament go on vacation for 6 weeks, 8 weeks, or even longer. But that's a different story. So at the moment, Netanyahu will have a minority government, it looks like. The problem he has is if he comes up with any agreement relating to Gaza, he will probably, most likely, lose both Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, but he could still operating for a while on a minority government. The government can't really fall until the parliament meets again, which is going to be after the Chagim, which will be at the very end of October. So until then, he can hold on to his government and hold things together. Then he can announce dissolving of parliament, go for new elections, which will take place in February or March, which is only 6 months or so before the scheduled time. So that's really not that big a difference altogether. So that's where we stand with politics. Um, we have new elections sooner rather than later. It's possible, but to be honest, everyone's numb, and that's the reality. Okay, we're at the halfway point or more. I'll stop now for questions. Please raise your hand. Hopefully, I will see you and answer any questions that you might have. Paul, Paul,
Yeah, hi, Mark. Question. About 2 or 3 days ago, I saw on I-24 News, it was a piece where the quote unquote recognized Yemeni government seized an Iranian ship with weapons that were going to the Houthis. I mean, really big, not rifles, but really big stuff. It was clear as from Iran. Iran got caught red-handed. Okay. I don't see why, other than seizing the ship and making sure the Houthis didn't get the stuff, I don't see why there has been no reaction from anybody. I mean, this was Iran got caught red-handed. There should be some repercussion, whether it's military, whether it's economic, something.
Well, again, who's the something? Trump would be the only, I mean, America could theoretically do something. It's not at all clear. I didn't really talk about Iran because that's another big question because we need an agreement with Iran. Because their nuclear program hasn't been eliminated. It's been pushed back considerably. We need some sort of agreement that will close it down. Um, we all know that Iran supports the Houthis. No one questions that. Um, Again, no one has the guts to do anything about the Houthis. What should have been done with the Houthis is the Americans should have armed the regular main government of the Houthis and agreed to support them aerial, from the air in any other way other than troops on the ground for them to win the civil war that's been going on for all these years to beat the Houthis because the Houthis can't stay in government there. They shouldn't be able to. They shouldn't be allowed to. But they are. So again, you're talking about what's right. Yeah, of course someone should have done something. But I don't see it happening. That's the reality. So I wish I had a better answer for you. Alan Alan Krim?
Yes, good morning. My question was, what's the situation up in Lebanon in terms of their perhaps strengthening themselves now that it's been quiet up there?
Okay, so Lebanon's an interesting situation at the moment, and another unknown, right? The reality is that Hezbollah, of course, has been tremendously weakened by the war. They're even more weakened by the fact that they don't have any real support. The Iranians can't get arms to them even if they want to. The Syrians used to support them, but they're no longer there to support them. So they're pretty much on their own. The Lebanese government has been trying to push them to disarm. So far, they haven't agreed, but they haven't said no. It's becoming a regular political party. The Lebanese government, we have been single-handedly enforcing the ceasefire kinetically. Anytime a Hezbollah person is in the wrong place where he's not supposed to be, south of the Litani River, we basically killed them. That's basically what we've been doing. We've also been attacking any attempt by them to reconstitute their missile forces. Uh, so that's how we've been enforcing the agreement. Uh, there is hope that the Lebanese government could gain control, but they're still weaker. The Lebanese army is still weaker than Hezbollah. So are they willing to risk it and to try to go to war with Hezbollah to force them to give up their arms? Will Hezbollah agree to give up their arms because they have no real choice? It's the best situation we've been in. It's the best chance of this happening in 2 generations. I remember when I was a kid, and I used to come when I came to Israel as a kid, and we went to the Lebanese border, and the guide would always say, Lebanon will always be the second country in the world, second country to make peace with Israel, because it couldn't be the first. It couldn't take the risk of being the first country. And of course, we've had many countries make peace with Israel since then, and Lebanon has not made peace with Israel. A peace with Israel and Lebanon would be actually, economically great for both countries. Um, there's a tunnel near Rosh Nikra. That's in the northern, the Lebanese border, a railroad tunnel that's bricked over. I can just, I'm sure we'd be happy to remove the bricks and we could begin the Tel Aviv to Beirut railroad once again. Everyone would love to see that happen. Then there's also the railroad going up to Damascus, and then the real dream from Damascus on to Europe. So we're no longer an island, but we'll have to wait for that. So it seems better, but anything can happen at this point, and I wouldn't bet on anything. Yochi.
What's the disagreement between the Druze and the Bedouins?
Okay. I said at the very beginning that my knowledge is a little bit fuzzy when it comes to some of these things. There's long-standing disagreements over land, over disagreements over clan disagreements and honor disagreements, all sorts of things that go back probably generations at this point. Um, so this is not something that's easily solvable, and it continues. The Bedouin, the claim is there's a ceasefire, and there's a claim that the Bedouin said they won't honor the ceasefire, even if there is a ceasefire. So we don't really know. Um, we don't really know. And like I said, I wish I was um, more more knowledgeable to answer this question because I really feel it's something that I'm missing. Um, it's clearly something that I'm missing. Um, but we'll try to find out some more about that. Okay. Alan, you put your hand back up, or that's from
Yes,
before?
yes, it's
Okay.
a related question to the one before. Um, I don't know, was it perhaps 100,000 people that were displaced from the northern border when Lebanon was rocketing the northern part of Israel? What proportion of the population has returned to their homes along the northern border, and how stable is that situation?
Okay, so it seems it's about 40 to 50% at this point. It's an unknown number exactly because it's hard to get statistics. It's not because of the Lebanese, it's because of our side not doing a good job. The In the South, the job was better done than it's been done in the North, to be honest, from what we can tell. In the South, the situation is clearly not as good. There hasn't been as much work done. The money hasn't gotten there. There's political fighting that's been going on. It also varies greatly. There are two very different towns. There's a town called Shlomi, which is on the west side of the border. Think of where Rosh Hashanah is, and it's about 5 or 6 miles to the um, east of it. And then there's Kiryat Shmona, which is all the way up north in the almost up towards further north. Shlomi, close to 95% or more of the people returned. In Kiryat Shmona, it's basically been 30 and 40%. Kiryat Shmona had more damage than Shlomi. Shlomi is very close to the border, but it's sort of a little bit protected it's right up against the mountains, so not as many shells landed there. Um, but also, it had a more efficient government. Local government was more efficient than Shlomi. The government in the Kiryat Shmona has been much more problematic. The mayor was opposed by the Likud, and they tried to run their own person. And you can imagine what happens when that happens. And the Likud official person lost to this other person. I don't know if that's the real reason, but the reality is that Kiryat Shmona is not back. A lot of buildings haven't been fixed. All the sort of things that need to be done has not been done. Everything has moved very, very slowly. And that's the reality throughout the country. Keep in mind there's some overall problems that relate to this and don't relate to this. Is the fact that the since October 7th, we have not allowed Palestinians into the building trade. So the building trade in this country is missing 50,000 workers, 60,000 workers. Now we made up a little bit from foreign workers, but we have made up for all of that. There's still a shortage of workers across all the building trade. The need for new buildings has not diminished. And all of a sudden, there's all the damage from the war. So there's a damage up north, there's a damage down south. And of course, now we have the damage done by the Iranians, where we've had complete, apartment blocks knocked down, both in Beersheba and Tel Aviv and Rishon and other places. We have Weizmann Institute that basically has to rebuild itself, almost, a good part of it destroyed. So all of this requires more and more building, and we don't have the capacity to do that. So that's another one of those many things. And of course, we have a government that's not all that efficient, shall I put it that way? So that unfortunately is the answer on both sides to that. Paul, are you back again?
Yeah, yeah. I just want to go back to Gaza. So
Who wants to go
obviously,
back to Gaza? No, go ahead.
every day, one, two, three boys get killed is obviously terrible. But I can't. I'm trying to envision what Gaza, what it'll be like if Israel ends the war and allows Hamas to stay in power. Even though obviously Hamas is greatly diminished, I understand that. But over time, it would try to reconstitute itself. Obviously, be terrible for the Gazans because I mean, it's basically a dictatorship that doesn't care about its own people. So, what would it be like if that's the deal that Netanyahu goes for?
I don't see what the problem is. I mean, so they'll reconstitute themselves. So look, we made a number of mistakes when it came to Gaza last time. When we pulled out, I favored the pull out from Gaza. And I made the mistaken assumption. I said, okay, once we pull out from Gaza, if one rocket lands in Israel, we're going to go in and flatten the area. Well, the first rocket landed, the second rocket landed, and for whatever reason, we were worried about international opinion and we were all sorts of different things. If we end this war and we make it clear that if one rocket gets fired, we're going to level a neighborhood. No, there's no playing around. If there's one attack, we're going to come in and we're going to send in 10,000 troops and we're going to do whatever we're going to do since we're no longer afraid. For reasons that are unknown, well, there were good reasons. We were more afraid of a war with Gaza. As much as it's been terrible how many soldiers we've lost much less than we figured we would lose. I mean, because it's lasted so long, we're still losing soldiers and it's starting to add up to a higher and higher number. But the reality is, because of our better armored systems, which we don't have enough of at the moment, but let's assume we're going to get some more of them, because of the fact that they are pretty much um, impenetrable, the reality is that we could have gone in a few times earlier, at least once we had the current systems. So make it very clear. If anyone does anything, we'll be back there in a number of hours. If there's any attack, we will level a block. And that's the reality. There's never going to be, some Israeli politicians, they're going to do another October 7th. They're not going to do another October 7th. October 7th would have ended in the biggest defeat in Hamas's history if we would have had 20 drones over the border fence at that moment. 20 drones and a state of alert along the border. We will never be in that situation where we will not, assume they're not going to attack. We're going to be assuming they're going to attack at any given time. It'll be a bit of a burden. Maybe someday soldiers will be replaced by robots, most likely, I think. But in the meantime, we'll have to have more soldiers on the border, but they're never going to do October 7th again. They were seriously well equipped infantrymen, but they wouldn't have had a chance against the Air Force and the Tank Corps and everything else if we would have been in place at the time. But we weren't. We won't make that mistake. Don't get me wrong. There'll be some other intelligence mistake in 10 years, 20 years, 50 years. We'll be surprised again by something, but not by this and not from Gaza ever again. So I find that to be just a false claim. Barry, I'm being told. Barry Blecher.
I'm not sure. Maybe I pressed by mistake.
Oh, okay, no problem.
Okay.
Okay. Alan, are you back again? Alan Krim? Okay. Claude.
No, I'm not.
Okay. Claude, I'm not sure why my wife in the other room sees these better than me. I do. I'm looking at Claude.
Well, Mark, I'm unlike a lot of the people, it seems, read the Wall Street Journal, and every day there's more and more and more and more casualties. The numbers are up and down in Gaza, and now there's been a couple of articles about the American who was killed in the West Bank. And the question I have is, how many people were arrested?
That's what I said. None.
Well, how is that possible that two people were killed and nobody was arrested?
Okay. Let me define two different points. None of it's an excuse. First of all, by and large, the Israeli rate of solving murders that relate to Arab Israelis, not even I'm talking about Palestinians in the West Bank, but Arab Israelis is basically about 20%. So we do a lousy job just there, not in the West Bank. In the West Bank, we do an even worse job. We don't have a real police force there. We have a police force that does minimal amount. They don't consider that their job to find settlers who killed Palestinians. The government doesn't understand how important that is. They don't care. Look, how many Jews are sitting in jails for all the things that have taken place against the Palestinians in the West Bank, in other words, in the last 2 years? I think the only case we have that I know about, maybe one or two more, was the case where the infant was burned to death. which right, Darashim. So that was about 2 years ago, I think it was, the very beginning of this war. Whatever, they actually found somebody and they actually convicted them and he's in jail. The rest of the things, no, they're not. Um, it's like there's this ladder of things that are problematic in this country, and how high that lies, I mean, it depends on what you think about the priorities, but it's real. It's very real. Um, you have to ask a different question. And this is I heard one of the military analysts asking this question just an hour ago, talking about this, you know, supposed humanitarian zone that we were going to create for the Gazans in Gaza, in Rafah. And he said, I cannot see any Israeli general who is only one generation away from a child of Holocaust survivors agreeing to implement something like that. Now, I don't know. We're doing things that I find morally problematic. I found morally problematic what we were doing 45 years ago when I did reserve duty in Gaza. Now, it doesn't mean, and I want to leave the West Bank for 2 seconds because I want to turn everything around for 2 seconds. Because the other side of this, and you have to ask the question, as much as Israel is being chided, denounced, everything else under the sun, why isn't there pressure on Hamas that says, surrender? If you care about your people, surrender. Negotiate safe passage, give up, and the war will end tomorrow morning. No more Gazans will die. Food will pour in, and that will be the end. I mean, just think about this being, this is Germany after Hitler had been, committed suicide in the bunker, and large numbers of the German army or SS decided they were going to keep on fighting. And the hell with the state of the German people. No, they surrendered in the end because they cared about the German people ultimately as much as they were fanatics and crazies. So all the things that I'm critical about the actions of the army in some ways, or the politics of the government, and I'm certainly critical of many things. The other side of the question has to be asked. Why is there no pressure? Why isn't the world screaming at Hamas, surrender? You don't militarily stand a chance at this point. If it wasn't for the fact you were holding hostages illegally, Israel would wipe the rest of you out in a matter of hours or days. So surrender. Let your people live in peace. I'm sure you can negotiate, your own safety and surrender. The war could end. Now, no one's doing that. No one's even arguing that. There's no claims about that because it's accepted the fact that Hamas could commit suicide for the people of Gaza, which is what they've done. So as much as I'm critical of all the things that our country has done or doing, or the lack of policy, the lack of thought, a lot of things are not intentional. It's a lack of thought more than anything else. The other side of it is this could all end instantly, but it won't, because ultimately Hamas is a terror organization.
Mark, I think you're great. I don't want to debate that because I'm sorry that you're there. But let me ask you another question, if you don't mind. Fayyad, Omer, so on and so forth. What's the thinking in Israel of all the news and that they're getting about a two-state solution and so on and so forth? I know I'm conflagrating a lot of
Look,
input.
no one's ready to talk about a two-state solution now. Let's be honest. There's even amongst the left in Israel, the most people are willing to talk about is leaving the door open for a future two-state solution. Nobody from the left all the way across is willing to say, we're going to trust the Palestinians enough to have a state anytime in the near term. After all, Gaza was a state. You can argue whether it had, whether it was a state under blockade, under this, that, lots of different things. We can argue about that all day. But the fact of the matter is, there is no sense in Israel that are willing to say, we're willing for a two-state solution anytime soon. Now, that could change, but in order for that to change, and I've been saying this for 10 years, it requires a Palestinian leader who has large-scale following to come out and say, go to the Knesset, like Sadat said, and said, we want the end of a conflict We will agree to some compensation for the refugees. The refugees won't come back to Israel. We'll be compensated for that. And we're ready for a final agreement with no future claims. If there was some Palestinian leader who had a large-scale following who came and said that, then peace would be possible. But so far, nobody has been willing to say that publicly. Nobody. Nobody has been willing, no Palestinian leader has been willing to reject the idea of the right of return. And the right of return is a no-go amongst 95% of Israelis. Maybe amongst Israeli Jews, maybe it's 98%. So without that, and if you consistently are still looking to reach the right of return, then the conflict isn't over. And no one wants a partial solution. And on top of everything else is that if we have any sort of solution to a two-state solution, it will tear this country apart in terms of the politics internally. And no one's willing to do that unless the other side of the other side of the bridge is real peace. Without real peace, no one's willing to risk civil war here in Israel. And I think people have to realize that. Then all this talk about two-state solution now, where do people think this two-state solution is going to come from at this point? Based on what? Based on what have the Palestinians done in the last 5 years that would indicate they're ready for a two-state solution? That's the problem. And you have to convince the Israeli people. I just hope we can convince enough of the Israeli people that we want to leave the door open for a two-state solution. We want to leave the demographics such that we can have a two-state solution someday in the future, so that my grandkids can reach a two-state solution. But I'm afraid, in my opinion, Claude and you and I are not going to ever see a two-state solution. But hopefully future generations will. But that's my pessimistic side. But it's been pessimistic for a while, even before the war. So, anyone else?
Yes, Mark, I have two questions. First is, isn't it naive to think that if there were some kind of agreement that there wouldn't be rockets coming from Gaza within a week? And the
Yes.
second
Go
is,
ahead.
could the Israeli armed forces simply say to the government, no, we are not going to put thousands of troops in to guard your idea of a large displaced persons camp in Gaza? We're not going to do it. Could the army refuse to do that?
Okay, so two parts of the question. The first one, I don't believe, again, if there's an agreement and the agreement calls for us to pull out of Gaza and we get back all of our hostages, we make it very clear the first rocket that launched, we will, and we say this to the whole world, rocket gets launched, we will level a square block in Gaza. We don't care how many people we're going to kill. One rocket, we level a square block, which I thought we were going to do the first time we pulled out initially. That was what I thought we would do. We didn't. But this time we have to make it clear that that's what's going to happen. They may fire some rockets, but let's remember the fact that their rockets basically all get intercepted at this point. Iron Dome is up to like 98% interception rate, so maybe even 99. So, and the laser is going to be deployed very, very soon against as the rockets from Gaza. It'll be 100% interception rate, then at a very low cost, it looks like. So I'm not worried about the rockets. As to your second question, it's a complicated question. Under a series of Israeli legal scholars sent a letter to the chief of staff and basically said that establishing that camp violated Israeli law and international law. And the reason they said Israeli law is because the only way that an army can refuse an order is if it's an illegal order. So if the order to guard, establish, whatever you want to call this humanitarian camp comes down, and the chief of staff believes it's an illegal order, he can say no. Will he say no? I don't know. Everything we've seen about Zamir is he has backbone. But will he say no in this case? I don't know. I hope it doesn't come down to it. I hope we reach an agreement sooner. I'm still reasonably optimistic we might reach an agreement within a week or 10 days, just because I don't see Netanyahu wanting to keep this going. And I don't see the Americans are letting go on much longer, and we really need to bring this to an end. But that may be my optimistic side at this point. I'm going to do this quickly because I have to be on I-24 in 5 minutes. So, Brian.
Hi there. The question I wanted to ask was that today I was reading in reports from Haaretz and Times of Israel about the army preparing to enter a part of Gaza, central Gaza, that hadn't entered before. I'm surprised to learn there was any part of Gaza they've not tried to enter before, where apparently there's thought that the hostages are being held, where the agencies operate from, where there's a concentration of Hamas leadership and troops, etc. Do you think there's a real prospect of that happening, or is it just saber rattling? Do you have any views on
Okay, so
that?
it's mostly saber rattling. It is a part of central Gaza. The particular point that they're about to enter is not the whole center camps. It's a different area exactly. Supposedly, there's intelligence that there are no hostages right there. It's another attempt at trying to pressure Hamas to reach an agreement at the moment. There are other issues besides the issue of land that seems to be a problematic relating to which Palestinians get released and other questions. So it's another attempt at pressuring Hamas. There are only limited number of things we can do at this point to pressure Hamas that won't endanger the hostages. Theoretically, this won't. Of course, the hostage families are very worried because the reason that area was not attacked until now was because that there are whole areas of Gaza that have not been attacked. There are areas that are completely intact, and you wouldn't know there would have been a war going on. But that's a whole other story. So I think it's mostly an attempt to pressure them, but we'll have to see.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everybody. We'll reconvene in 2 weeks.
Thank
Right? Maybe one of these 2 weeks we'll be able to reconvene and sum up the war, but hopefully at some point soon. So I thank you.
Mark. Thank you.
Okay, take care, everybody.
Bye.